The observation deck of the Talon's Edge hummed with the low thrum of distant engines, a lullaby for warriors who'd forgotten how to sleep. Commander Lyra Hale sat cross-legged on the cold metallic floor, her back against the reinforced viewport that framed the swirling nebula beyond. She should have been in her quarters. Should have been filing mission reports. Should have been doing anything except sitting here in the dim blue light, waiting. But she knew they would come. The door hissed open with mechanical precision, and 4 pairs of luminescent eyes appeared in the darkness. The cubs padded forward on paws designed for silent killing. Their obsidian claws retracted against the deck plating. They were Zarathi, apex predators from a world where mercy was an evolutionary disadvantage, where young were thrown into combat trials before their first molt. The Galactic Coalition had recruited their species for one purpose: war. These 4 were the youngest cohort, trainees, though trainee felt like a grotesque euphemism for what they'd endured. "Hey there," Lyra said softly, not moving. Never moving first. That was the rule she'd learned. The lead cub, Striker, though that was the designation burned into his neural collar, not a name he'd chosen, approached with ears flat against his skull. His silver-streaked fur was still matted with the residue of today's training exercise. The Coalition called it training. Lyra called it what it was: a massacre where children were taught to become monsters. Striker stopped 3 feet away, his muscular frame trembling. Not from fear, from exhaustion, from the weight of instincts that screamed kill warring against something else, something new and terrifying that the human had planted in his chest. "It's okay," Lyra whispered. "You're safe now." The other 3, Swift, Shadow, and the smallest one Lyra privately called Hope, formed a semicircle. Their violet eyes tracked every micro-movement, every breath. Trust didn't come naturally to Zarathi. It had to be earned in blood and silence and 1,000 tiny gestures that said, "I will not hurt you." Slowly, deliberately, Lyra extended her hand palm up. An offering. An invitation. Striker's nostrils flared, analyzing her scent. Humans smelled wrong to most species. Too much salt, too much emotion leaking through their pores. But to these cubs, Lyra's scent had become something else. Sanctuary. Home. The massive cub took 1 step. Then another. And then, with a shuddering exhale that sounded almost like a sob, he collapsed into her lap. 300 pounds of trained killer curled against her chest, his head tucked beneath her chin, seeking the warmth that his own den masters had never provided. The others followed immediately. Swift pressed against her left side. Shadow claimed her right, and Hope, tiny, scarred Hope, wiggled into the space between Lyra's crossed legs, burying her face against the human stomach. Lyra wrapped her arms around them as best she could, feeling the rapid-fire heartbeats against her ribs. They were trembling. All of them. Warriors bred for merciless efficiency, shaking like abandoned puppies. "I know," she murmured, her fingers finding the soft spots behind Striker's ears. He made a sound, not quite a purr, not quite a whimper. "I know it was bad today, but you're here now. You're here." The Coalition didn't understand. The Zarathi elders certainly didn't understand. When Lyra had first been assigned as liaison to the trainee cohorts, she'd been given explicit instructions. Do not fraternize. Do not show weakness. Do not treat them as anything other than weapons being forged. She'd ignored every single directive, because Lyra Hale had seen war. Real war. She'd watched good soldiers break under the weight of violence without end, had held dying friends who'd whispered for their mothers with their last breaths. And when she looked at these cubs, these children forced to kill before they understood what death meant, she saw the same fractures forming. The Zarathi method was brutal efficiency: strip away emotion, amplify aggression, reward only victory. It produced perfect soldiers who self-destructed by age 7. The Coalition accepted this as necessary wastage. Lyra had other ideas. "You did good today," she said, knowing it was a lie. There was nothing good about what they'd been forced to do, but they needed to hear it anyway. "You survived. That's what matters," Hope whimpered, a sound that would have gotten her culled from the program if anyone else had heard it. Weakness was intolerable in Zarathi culture. But here, in the darkness with only Lyra as witness, the cubs could be what they truly were. Children. Terrified children who'd never asked to be weapons. Striker's claws extended involuntarily, pricking through Lyra's uniform. She didn't flinch. Pain was easy. She'd endure 1,000 cuts if it meant they felt safe for one more night. "Commander Hale," the comm system crackled. "You're needed in the strategy room." She tapped her wrist unit without disturbing the cubs. "Busy, reschedule." "Ma'am, the Admiral can wait." Her tone left no room for argument. "Hale out." Shadow made a rumbling sound, almost like a question. Lyra understood without words. "Will you leave?" "Not tonight," she promised. "Not until you're ready." The truth was more complicated. The Coalition was watching her unorthodox methods with increasing concern. Sarathi cubs weren't supposed to bond. They weren't supposed to seek comfort. They certainly weren't supposed to abandon their assigned dens to curl up in a human's lap like domesticated creatures. But Lyra had discovered something the Coalition's scientists had missed. Sarathi weren't just predators. They were pack animals. And every pack needed an alpha who protected instead of punished. So she sat there on the cold deck, 4 juvenile killing machines pressed against her, and hummed an old Earth lullaby her grandmother had taught her. The cubs didn't understand the words, human vocal patterns were beyond their range, but they understood the intent. The gentleness, the promise that dawn would come and they would face it together. Hours later, when the nebula had shifted from violet to deep crimson, the cubs finally slept. Their breathing synchronized, a rhythm of trust that Lyra knew was a gift beyond measure. Tomorrow the Coalition would demand answers. Tomorrow she'd have to defend her methods to commanders who saw only numbers and combat efficiency ratings. But tonight, she was exactly where she needed to be, a guardian for those who'd forgotten what safety felt like, a den for cubs who'd been taught that dens were only for the weak, and maybe, just maybe, proof that humanity's greatest strength wasn't its capacity for violence, but its stubborn, illogical, beautiful refusal to let others suffer alone.